The warm, humid Texas breeze swept gently across the wide, manicured lawn of a beautiful ranch-style home in Austin. Inside, the kitchen smelled of roasted garlic, caramelized onions, and rich beef broth. Richard Cole, a 65-year-old retired chief accountant, stood by the marble kitchen island, humming a soft jazz tune as he poured himself a glass of red wine. He was a man of precise habits, neatly ironed polo shirts, silver hair parted perfectly to the side, and a calm, calculating gaze honed by 40 years of balancing complex corporate ledgers. Since his wife had passed away 2 years ago, this spacious, sun-drenched house and his solid $2 million retirement portfolio were his sanctuaries. To the outside world, Richard was a lonely widower, but to his youngest daughter, Megan, he was an obstacle standing between her and a life of unearned luxury. "Dad, the soup is almost ready," Megan's voice chimed happily from the stove. She was 26, with a bright, bubbly smile that had always made her Richard's favorite. She wore a casual floral dress, looking every bit the dutiful daughter who drove across town every single weekend to cook him Sunday dinner. Behind her, leaning against the counter, with an easy, practiced grin, was her boyfriend Liam. Liam was a smooth-talking personal trainer with expensive tastes, a mountain of unpaid credit card debt, and a lingering shadow of desperation in his eyes that Richard had noticed weeks ago. "You didn't have to go to all this trouble, Megan," Richard said, taking a slow sip of his wine. His sharp eyes quietly took in the way Liam's fingers twitched against his pocket, and how Megan's smile seemed just a fraction too wide, a little too forced. A simple takeout would have been fine. "Oh, stop it, Dad," Megan laughed, stirring the heavy pot of French onion soup. "You deserve a real, home-cooked meal. Plus, Liam and I love spending these Sundays with you. Don't we, Liam?" "Absolutely, Mr. Cole," Liam chimed in, his voice slick and eager. "We just want to make sure you're taken care of. Actually, while Megan finishes up the soup, why don't you let me show you that new digital security app we talked about? The one to protect your banking folders. I can set it up on your phone right now." Richard smiled, but inside, his professional instincts flared. As a lifetime accountant, he knew that when someone offered to manage your security for free, they were usually trying to find the key to your vault. "That's very kind of you, Liam," Richard murmured, sliding his phone onto the counter. "But I've always preferred the old-fashioned way. High-tech security is for people with something to hide." "Dad, don't be so stubborn," Megan said, bringing a large, steaming bowl of soup to the dining table. "Just let Liam help. You know how dangerous hackers are these days. Now, sit down. The soup is hot, and we made your favorite with extra melted Gruyere." Richard pulled out his chair and sat down. He looked at the rich, dark soup sitting in front of him, and then at Megan and Liam, who were already sitting opposite him, watching his hand reach for the spoon with a strange, breathless intensity. The wind outside rustled the oak trees in the yard, but inside the dining room, the silence was suddenly heavy, suffocating, and filled with a cold, hidden danger. Richard dipped his silver spoon into the rich, dark broth, lifting a string of melted Gruyere cheese. He brought the spoon close to his mouth, but just as the steam hit his face, his highly trained senses stalled. For 40 years, Richard had lived by a simple rule: if the details don't balance, something is wrong. And right now the aroma was unbalanced. Beneath the sweet, rich scent of caramelized onions and beef stock, there was a faint, medicinal sharpness, a metallic, bitter undertone that did not belong in a home-cooked meal. He glanced up. Megan was staring at him, her hands clasped tightly under her chin, her knuckles white. Liam was leaning forward, his eyes darting from the spoon to Richard's face, his leg bouncing nervously under the table. "Is everything okay, Dad?" Megan asked, her voice cracking slightly. "You're not eating." "It's just a bit hot, sweetheart," Richard said smoothly, lowering the spoon back into the bowl. He reached for his napkin, wiping his mouth to buy himself a few seconds. My stomach has been a little sensitive today. I think I need a glass of cold water first. I'll get it. Liam jumped up immediately, almost too fast, rushing toward the kitchen. While Liam's back was turned, Richard glanced at the kitchen counter where his smartphone lay. Beside it was a small, black USB-C dongle that Liam had quietly left plugged into the port. Richard's heart did a slow, heavy thud. He knew exactly what that was: a hardware keylogger used to clone mobile data and bypass banking authorization protocols. Megan noticed him looking at the counter. "Dad, drink some soup. It'll settle your stomach, I promise." Richard smiled warmly at his daughter, a deep, crushing sorrow blooming in his chest. She really is in on this, he realized. He took a deep breath, feigning a sudden, dry coughing fit. He pressed the napkin to his mouth, coughing heavily, his shoulders shaking. "Oh, goodness," Richard gasped, waving his hand frantically toward the kitchen. "Megan, please, get me some honey from the pantry. My throat is entirely closed up." Okay, just hold on, Dad." Megan stood up in a panic, spinning around and hurrying into the deep kitchen pantry to search the shelves. The moment she turned her back, Richard acted with the silent, rapid precision of a man who had spent his life managing crises. He grabbed his heavy ceramic bowl, stepped swiftly to the large, potted weeping fig tree in the corner of the dining room, and poured the steaming soup directly into the thick, dark soil. He quickly wiped the rim of the bowl with his napkin, ran back to the table, and sat down just as Liam walked back in with a glass of ice water, followed closely by Megan holding a jar of honey. Richard took the water, drinking it down greedily, still panting slightly. "Thank you, Liam." "Thank you, Megan. Much better." He gestured to the empty bowl on his table. Megan's eyes widened as she looked at the clean ceramic dish, and a look of profound, chilling relief washed over her face. She looked at Liam and gave him a subtle, almost imperceptible nod. "Wow, you finished it fast," Liam said, a dark, victorious smirk creeping onto his lips. He walked over to the kitchen counter, casually unplugged the black dongle from Richard's phone, and slipped it into his pocket. "I told you, Mr. Cole. Megan's cooking is magic. You'll be sleeping like a baby tonight." "I already feel a bit drowsy, actually," Richard murmured, letting his eyelids droop, his head nodding slightly. He leaned back in his chair, letting his arms hang loose. Very, very sleepy. "Why don't you go up to bed, Dad?" Megan suggested, her voice dropping all pretense of warmth, replaced by a cold, businesslike efficiency. "We'll clean up everything down here. You just close your eyes." "Yes," Richard whispered, slurring his words perfectly. I think I'll do that." He slowly stood up, letting his knees buckle slightly to play the part, and dragged his feet toward the stairs. But as he climbed the wooden steps into the darkness of the second floor, his mind was racing at 1,000,000 miles an hour. They had cloned his phone, and they had poisoned his food. They thought they had won, but they had just walked right into the ledger of a master accountant, and Richard was about to balance the books. Chapter 3. The digital ledger. Richard closed his bedroom door with a soft, deliberate click. The moment the latch engaged, his sluggish, stumbling posture vanished. He stood in the dark room, his breathing calm and regular, his mind sharp as a razor. He walked over to his heavy mahogany wardrobe, reached past his winter coats, and pressed a hidden latch on the back panel. A small, biometric safe popped open. Inside sat a rugged, military-grade encrypted tablet, his secondary secure device, completely disconnected from his main phone's network. He booted up the screen, its pale blue glow reflecting in his cold, calculating eyes. As a retired chief accountant, Richard's security protocols were not standard. He didn't just have password protection. He had a silent, dual token authorization system tied directly to his personal banking representative at Austin National Bank. Within seconds, the tablet's screen flickered. A red warning banner flashed across the top. Unauthorized access detected. Cloned IP address. Downstairs, the low murmur of voices drifted up through the floorboards, accompanied by the clink of glasses. They were celebrating. "Look at this," Megan, Liam's voice whispered, barely audible but thick with manic greed. "The keylogger worked. I've bypassed his primary biometric lock. I'm inside his retirement portfolio. There's $2.1 million just sitting in the liquid money market fund." "Just transfer it, Liam," Megan urged, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and excitement. "Do it in 3 separate transactions to the offshore shell account. Once the money clears, we can tell the doctors his cognitive state collapsed tonight, and we need emergency guardianship." Upstairs, Richard watched the digital ledger in real time. He saw the cursor hovering over his life savings. He saw the first transfer request of $700,000 initiate. Normally, the bank would block this instantly and send a loud, ringing alert to his phone. But Richard had no intention of stopping them yet. An aborted transfer was just a technical glitch. A completed, fraudulent wire transfer was a federal felony. He wanted them to commit the crime fully, with zero room for legal escape. Richard tapped a secure messaging app on his tablet and dialed a direct line. "Marcus," Richard said into his Bluetooth earpiece, his voice a quiet, freezing whisper. "They're taking the bait. They just initiated the first wire transfer of $700,000. On the other end of the line, Marcus Vance, the head of Austin National's cybersecurity division and Richard's former colleague, let out a grim sigh. "I see it on my terminal, Richard. The clone device signature matches the IP we flagged. We've routed the funds into a secure, digital mirror holding account. To their screen, the transfer will look 100% complete and cleared, but the money is locked in our vault." "Excellent," Richard murmured, his fingers flying across his tablet to activate the GPS tracking on his cloned phone. "How long to trace the destination account?" "We've already traced it to an offshore bank in the Cayman Islands registered under Liam's shell company," Marcus replied. "The moment they initiate the second transfer, the federal fraud trigger goes live. The Austin Police Department is already on standby. They have the coordinates of your ranch." "Let them start the second transfer," Richard said, his jaw tightening. "I want the paper trail absolute. I'm going to walk downstairs and hand them their final invoice." Downstairs, the soft glow of a laptop screen illuminated the dark dining room. Liam's face was twisted in a manic, sweating grin as his fingers tapped frantically on the keyboard. "The second transfer of $700,000 is pending, and boom," Liam whispered loudly, hitting the enter key with a triumphant flourish. "It's cleared. The Cayman account just registered the deposit. We're over halfway there, Meg. Just one more transfer and your dad's entire portfolio is ours." Megan stood beside him, her arms crossed tightly, chewing on her lower lip. She kept looking toward the dark hallway leading to the stairs. "Is he really asleep, Liam? That soup had enough sedative to knock out a horse. But, I don't know. I feel sick." "Relax," Liam sneered, his eyes locked on the screen as he prepared the final transaction of $700,000. The old man drank the soup. You saw the empty bowl. By tomorrow morning he won't even remember his own name, let alone his bank password. We are minutes away from total freedom. I wouldn't call a federal penitentiary total freedom, Liam. The deep, chillingly calm voice cut through the darkness of the room like a scalpel. Both Megan and Liam gasped, spinning around so fast Liam almost knocked his laptop off the table. Standing at the foot of the stairs, framed by the faint moonlight streaming through the window, was Richard. He wasn't stumbling. He wasn't disoriented. He stood perfectly straight, clad in his crisp cotton shirt, holding a sleek black tablet in his left hand. His blue eyes, cold and piercing, were locked onto them with absolute, unwavering clarity. "Dad?" Megan stammered, her voice dropping an octave as her face drained of all color. You're supposed to be asleep?" Richard finished her sentence, taking a slow, measured step into the dining room. "Perhaps if I had actually eaten your soup instead of feeding it to the weeping fig in the corner, I would be. But as an accountant, Megan, I've always had a low tolerance for things that taste unbalanced." Liam's panic instantly flared into aggression. He snatched the laptop, holding it protectively against his chest. "It doesn't matter what you know, old man. The transfer is already done. Look at the screen. The money is gone. 2 transactions have already cleared into our offshore accounts. You can't stop it now." Richard didn't flinch. He slowly raised his tablet, tapping the screen once to cast a digital document onto the large smart television on the living room wall. A massive banking ledger appeared on the TV screen. It showed 3 transactions, but instead of green check marks, they were flagged with bright red blinking text. "Apprehended by system integrity. Mirror holding block." "I spent 40 years balancing books, Liam," Richard said, his voice flat, carrying the weight of a judge delivering a verdict. "Did you truly believe a cheap, $40 hardware keylogger would bypass the security grid of a man who literally designed the audit protocols for Austin National Bank?" Megan stared at the television screen, her breath catching in her throat as she saw the words Fraud Investigation Active blinking next to their offshore account number. "Liam? What is that? What did he do?" "Your transactions never reached the Caymans, Megan," Richard explained, looking at his daughter with a profound, freezing disappointment. "They were routed into a secure digital mirror. To your laptop, the transfer looked complete. To the Federal Bureau of Investigation, it was the final, undeniable proof of grand larceny and wire fraud." Liam's eyes went wild. He dropped the laptop and lunged toward the kitchen counter, grabbing his car keys. "We're leaving Meg. Now. He's bluffing." "I rarely bluff, Liam," Richard said quietly, "and you aren't going anywhere." Right on cue, the quiet suburban night was shattered by the sudden, deafening wail of sirens. Brilliant red and blue police lights exploded through the front windows, slicing through the dark dining room and trapping the 2 thieves in their glare. The heavy oak front door of the ranch house rattled violently under the authoritative pounding of the Austin Police Department. "Police! Open the door immediately!" The sheer volume of the sirens outside made the windowpanes vibrate. The red and blue strobe lights cast long, frantic shadows across the dining room walls, turning the warm, familiar family home into an active crime scene. Liam spun around like a trapped animal, his face slick with sweat, his breathing shallow and rapid. He looked at the back patio door, then at Richard, and finally at the laptop on the table. In a moment of pure, desperate madness, he lunged toward the smart TV, trying to rip the HDMI cable out of the wall as if destroying the display would somehow erase the digital paper trail. "Don't do it, Liam," Richard said, his voice deadly quiet. "You're only adding destruction of evidence to a federal indictment." Before Liam could touch the wire, the front door was thrown open. 3 uniformed officers and a plainclothes detective flooded the room, their flashlights slicing through the darkness, guns drawn but kept low. "Austin PD, hands in the air. Do not move." Liam froze, his hands trembling as he slowly raised them above his head. A deputy stepped forward, grabbed Liam's wrist, and forced him down onto the hardwood floor. With a sharp, metallic click, the handcuffs locked behind his back. Richard, the detective, a sharp-eyed woman named Detective Miller, said as she stepped into the room. She nodded respectfully to the retired accountant. We received the digital flag and the tracking signal. Cyber Crimes Division has already seized the IP routing data. The hardware keylogger is in his front right pocket, Detective, Richard said, pointing at Liam. And the laptop on the table contains the active session where they tried to execute 3 wire transfers totaling $2.1 million. As an officer searched Liam and pulled out the black USB-C dongle, Megan collapsed onto her knees. The reality of her situation hit her like a physical blow. The bubbly, affectionate daughter was gone, replaced by a terrified, weeping child. "Dad, please," Megan sobbed, her tears smudging her makeup as she looked up at Richard. She tried to crawl toward him, but an officer gently but firmly held her shoulder. "I didn't want to do this. Liam forced me. He owes hundreds of thousands to dangerous people. They threatened him, Dad. They threatened us. I only did it to save his life." Liam, face pressed against the floor, let out a bitter, mocking laugh. "Save my life? You were the one who suggested the sedative, Meg. You said your dad was getting old and wouldn't even notice the money was gone." Megan's face twisted in horror as her own boyfriend betrayed her in front of the police. "Shut up, Leah. Shut up." She looked back at Richard, her voice cracking with desperation. "Dad, you know me. I'm your little girl. Mom always told you to protect me. You can't let them take me to jail. Please, Dad. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Richard looked down at his youngest daughter. For a fleeting second, he saw the little girl who used to sit on his lap while he calculated the household budget. He felt a deep, hollow ache in his chest, a sorrow that no amount of money could ever heal. But Richard was a man who understood numbers, and numbers did not lie. Larceny was larceny. Poison was poison. "Your mother taught you many things, Megan," Richard said, his voice thick with emotion, but remaining steady and cold. "But she never taught you to put poison in your father's food. She never taught you to steal a lifetime of hard work. Dad, it was just a mistake. We can put the money back," she screamed as the female officer pulled her to her feet and clicked the handcuffs around her wrists. "An accountant's ledger has to balance, Megan," Richard said, turning his back to her. "Every action has a cost, and tonight, your invoice has come due." The heavy oak door finally closed, shutting out the biting wail of the sirens and the desperate, weeping pleas of his youngest daughter. The red and blue strobe lights gradually faded down the quiet suburban street, leaving the ranch house in a profound, heavy silence. Richard stood alone in the center of the living room. The room was dark, save for the pale blue light of his encrypted tablet and the warm orange glow of the single-floor lamp in the corner. He walked slowly over to the weeping fig tree in the corner of the dining room. He knelt down, touching the dark, damp soil where he had poured the poisoned soup. A quiet sigh escaped his lips. The betrayal stung, a deep, hollow ache that no bank balance could ever truly heal. But as he stood up and looked around the empty house, the overwhelming weight of suspicion and constant alertness that had plagued him for weeks finally lifted. For the first time in a long time, the air in his home felt clean. He walked back to the dining table, picked up the laptop Liam had left behind, and shut the lid with a firm, satisfying click. He carried his encrypted tablet back to his study, setting it down on his mahogany desk. On the screen, a new notification from Austin National Bank popped up. "All protocols restored. System secure." Richard tapped the screen, officially closing the file. He walked over to the kitchen, poured the remaining red wine down the sink, and washed his hands thoroughly. He then brewed himself a fresh cup of chamomile tea, making sure to use a brand new, sealed box from the upper pantry. Carrying his mug, Richard walked out onto the back patio. The warm Texas night air rustled the oak trees, and the stars shone brightly over the manicured lawn. He sat down in his favorite wicker chair, taking a slow, cautious sip of the hot, soothing tea. It was perfectly sweet, with no metallic undertones, no bitterness, and no hidden traps. He had spent his entire life auditing accounts, tracking down missing pennies, and ensuring that every single ledger balanced perfectly to the decimal. Tonight, the human ledger of his life had been audited. The cost had been incredibly high, and the emotional deficit was heavy, but the books were finally clean. Richard closed his eyes, leaned his head back against the chair, and let the absolute, unshakable peace of the quiet Texas night wash over him. The ledger was balanced,